Hello and welcome to another MSDP tutorial video. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the MSDP dials. We'll see how to add them to our projects and how to customize them to the values that we need to set for our parameters. I have the Comer module open that we began in the third video, and behind that I have the dial tutorial patch, which you can find in the source code in the modules folder in the templates folder at the very top where it says dial tutorial. You can learn a lot in the dial tutorial, but we'll be covering all of this content today and we'll be going in a little bit deeper. MSDP dials are very useful because we can set a low and high value that we recommend for our parameters, but users who want to go beyond those recommendations can move the number boxes immediately to higher values and lower values than the defaults that we set. MSDP dials come in three sizes: a normal, a small, and an extra small. They come in three color options, and they all have the same functionality, with the one exception of the extra small dial, because the extra small dial cannot have the numbers manually updated by clicking and dragging directly on the number values. In our Comer module right now, we have 4 parameters beyond the volume, input, and output that we can set, and right now they all use number boxes. The number boxes are certainly useful, but they lack that immediacy that we get with the dial. So if we wanted to replace each of these with dials, we could use the MSDP Builder tool. The Builder tool, as we saw in the previous video, gives us the ability to add in MSDP tooling immediately by choosing the tooling that we want to choose and then clicking the Create button. If we look at that drop-down menu again, we can see that the first 3 options are the dials in the 3 sizes. Note that we do not set color here and we do not set parameters. We simply choose which type of dial we want. So I'll choose that first normal dial and then hit Create to make that object. Because we already had parameters 4, 5, 6, and 7 created, when I made the new dial, it created parameter 8. However, if I delete that and delete the msdp.param parameter 4 object, now when I create a dial, it will make that 4th parameter. So remember that the Builder tool scrubs through the patch to find which parameters have already been created and makes the next one available of the selection that have not been made yet. So now we have a normal dial in the default color scheme with a default range scaling between 0 and 2. If we want to change this, we need to change the arguments for the object. Now, normal objects in Macs can have the arguments placed directly in the UI. But since this is a bpatcher, we need to set the arguments in the inspector. So, with the bpatcher inspector open, we can look down until we find the arguments section, and we can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 arguments we need to set. That may feel like a lot, but it's pretty easy to do once we know how it works. The first argument is the parameter number, and we need to use the protocol of using the lowercase p, no space, and then the parameter number that we want to set to. Since this is the 4th parameter, it needs to be parameter P4. The second argument is the name that we want to have displayed in the dial, and we need to be a little careful with this. Any name that we want to have that utilizes a space needs to be wrapped in double quotes. So I'm going to create the open and close quote first, and then I'll put the name in between those quotes. I like to put the parameter number, followed by a space and the dial name. Since this 4th parameter is delay, I'll say open quote 4 dot space delay end quote. And we can see that that updates accordingly in the U menu or in the bpatcher. Do be aware that there's a limited amount of space available in that patch, and if we get too far, the words will actually break out of the shell, and that does not look very attractive. So we need to be a little economical with our naming conventions. The next 3 values are the low value for the dial, the high value for the dial, and the starting value for the dial. Now in the delay box, we may want to have a pretty large range. So I'll set a low value of 1 millisecond and a high value of 2000 milliseconds. And then I'll set a starting value of 500 milliseconds. Notice that I use floating point values for all of those so that we can have floating point options. As soon as I moved away from the inspector, those values updated, and I can now move the dials between that new low and high range. The 6th argument determines whether the dial will output floating point or integer values. we'll use f for floating point and I for integer. So we can see that with the integer value, we have no decimal point, and it will only output and display whole numbers. Finally, that last argument value determines the color scheme for the dial. We have 3 color schemes, and we can set them as color schemes number 1, which is a dark gray background with teal highlights, 2, which is a teal background with dark gray highlights, and 3, which is a transparent background with the dark gray highlights. So we can see that these dials are very easy to set up. We simply make one with the Builder tool, and then replace all of the default arguments with the arguments that we want to use to customize and to create the custom dial that we need for our parameter. Once I have that set up, I can replace the float point number box that I had originally in that spot. Now it's important to note that UI dials do not require an MSDP.param object. They have all of that tooling built into them. And by default, they will display in the presentation view. So I can see there's my delay dial there. I don't need this message box either. And once it's done, I can simply place it in presentation view as I want it to appear for the users of the module. Setting additional values then is as simple as deleting the parameters that we built for our defaults and replacing them with our new dials. So now we can see with our new dials in place, we have an interface that's much more aesthetically attractive and much more aesthetically in line with the rest of the MSDP tooling. If you wanted to make custom dials, you could, and you could use the MSDP.param objects instead. But with this system set up, you can very quickly create dials that work natively and intuitively with the rest of the system. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon with more tutorial videos.